So let's talk about these COVID mandates.
All right. Well, New York City is going to fight back against a ruling that ordered the city to reinstate all unvaccinated employees and pay them back pay. This ruling came on Tuesday, and New York City says, nope, we're not doing that. So let me tell you about the ruling, and then we'll ask the question, how can New York fight this? The state Supreme Court said that the city was wrong when it fired approximately 1,700 employees for not taking the COVID vaccine, especially since now this is according to the judge. There is no evidence that the vaccine prevents the spread of the virus. The city argued that it could fire these employees for public health reasons. But the vaccine mandate had a truly elitist hole in it, in that it did not require this mandate to be instated for athletes, artists, and performers. How can you say you're following the science when you give a certain group of privileged people who perform in front of the masses a vaccine pass? I don't understand that at all. And that's fine for public health. Well, obviously you can't. Judge Ralph Porzio called this a violation, and he said it's a violation of the law that requires all persons to be treated equal. Here's from his ruling. He says that though the city employees are often held to a higher standard than employees in the private sector, there's no rational reason for vaccination mandates to distinguish city workers, athletes, performers, and other private sector employees. He says either there's a mandate for all or there's a mandate for none. So you poked a bunch of holes in all of your scientific backing when you gave elitists a pass. That this is obviously just one case, but it is a precedent-setting case. Lawmakers have to defend what they did during the pandemic and how they, as Carol Roth, a great author, says, picked winners and losers. So in this case, the city picked the losers, which is city sanitation workers. Why pick a fight with them? And they picked their winners, artists and athletes. Here's another great example of this. While the rest of us were told we had to lock down and our children could not go to school, Saturday Night Live was allowed to keep on going because they were deemed essential workers. How did they get away with that? Well, in the fall of 2020, SNL filmed in front of a live audience at a time when no live audiences were allowed, and by paying audience members $150 each so that they could technically qualify them as cast members.
What?
Now, this is an insult, of course, to bars, local theaters, but especially schools. I am always going to get pissed off on behalf of children that couldn't go to school.
Yeah.
Children who, like I mentioned, when our children had their first performance after the pandemic started to ease, I burst into tears for all these kids who could not perform live when it was their passion during their, school careers. But Saturday Night Live can.
Right.
That's utter shit.
They're essential because of their terrible comedy.
Right. But my children or children in New York who wanted to do their local production of Our Town are less important.
Right.
Okay. The court says that this is essentially what's called disparate treatment. It says here, granting exceptions for certain classes and selectively lifting vaccination orders while maintaining others is simply the definition of disparate treatment. Which could mean that other industries can point out disparate treatment in the courts. And I hope they absolutely do. For instance, Carol Roth tells the story of a woman in California who spent $80,000 retrofitting her restaurant to be able to serve outside, was closed down anyway because of new rounds of lockdowns. But in the same parking lot, craft services could serve outside, the same thing she was willing to do because they were filming a movie.
So they had tents set up that they could serve food to the actors.
In the same way she was going to. So no to the private sector, but yes to movie stars.
Of course.
Again, I'm just going to use the same saying. That's utter shit. A few other things this judge said that we hope becomes precedent is about the authority of the health commissioner who brought down this ruling. He said the public health commissioner cannot enact a term of employment or exclude someone from entering the workplace, and especially not when that term of employment did not exist when someone started employment. The court says that if you want to do that, then you have to go to the unions. In the next slide, he says, how can a condition of employment be created during the term of employment? This court believes that a new condition of employment cannot be imposed upon these employees when it did not exist when they accepted employment. The court says it understands the idea of an emergency, but he makes this point: you have to justify an emergency, not just because politicians all say so. He points out that when the mandate went into place, daily case numbers in New York were down. So here you have the first incidence of a judge saying, you have to justify these emergency numbers.
Hallelujah.
This, again, I think is precedent setting, because the rest of us who have had to live under these emergency settings are going to ask governments, how are you doing this? If a judge says you have to answer for it, then answer for it. About this emergency, he says it's supposed to be temporary and not affect people's lives forever. Here's this quote again from his ruling. The question presented is whether the health commissioner has the authority to enact a permanent condition of employment during a state of emergency, right? This should not affect people's lives forever. It should not be a power grab that you hold on to, which you can see it's like a little kid with chocolate that politicians are just like, I'm not letting this go.
Like Trudeau
out of
in
my
Canada.
cold, dead hands, I will give up this power. The judge brings up the point that we now all accept that the vaccine does not prevent the spread of COVID. This is 2 pages of the ruling, which is why it looks like this. But he says, being vaccinated does not prevent an individual from contracting or transmitting COVID. At the day of the decision, CDC guidelines regarding quarantine and isolation were the same for unvaccinated and vaccinated individuals. So, this was never about stopping the spread for other people. In fact, many of these employees asked for exemptions, and the judge said they were given denials that were vague. So you couldn't even justify why you were letting them go. And he said, while they were being appealed, their decisions, they said these people were willing to keep testing if you just wanted to prevent the spread. And they said no, which doesn't make sense, because if you're willing to test every day,
right,
then you are preventing the spread more than a vaccination, and they wouldn't give them that option. So the judge ordered that they reinstate full employment of these people, that they pay them back salary, and they propose a judgment of how much they will pay them by November 10th. But the cities say no, they're going to file an appeal. They're not going to do it. And my question is, how are they going to defend this? How are they going to say that the mandates were not disparate when they had these options to not comply for artists? How can they argue that a vaccine mandate has any more relevance now? And why fight against these people? Even the judge says these people are not your enemy. The city had made a case that these are people who interact with people, so we need them vaccinated. And the judge said that no, they're not. He says this argument is patently incorrect. These petitioners work outdoors and have limited interaction with the public. So
yeah, how many when you're out with look, our sanitation worker comes like early in the morning. I don't ever see the individuals.
They're gone before you're out the door most of the time.
I'm not hanging out in the street with them. I mean, occasionally if I'm walking the dog, I might wave to them like 30 feet away and say, hi, good morning to you. But we're not like, hanging out and having coffee. It's ridiculous.
And, the title of their job is sanitation. Without them, cities will fall into extreme disrepair and disease.
Right.
They are risking their lives to go out and presumably pick up bacteria and disease. They did it before there was a vaccine. They do it in extreme heat, extreme cold. These are the last people to pick a fight on. And, also, again, they worked when nobody else would. So we're going to watch to see how the city thinks it could possibly defend this, because I don't see how they could. It just seems so mean-spirited.
Well, yeah, and what I love the judge's ruling, though, to figure out like what the damages will be here, because it's not just, oh, we'll give you back pay, go backwards retroactively and give you your job back to back when you were fired. Also, it's the mental damage, right? It's the emotional damage. Like whatever else you went through as a result of being fired during that amount of time.
And your credibility.
Yeah.
Like think of the credibility that people see them as anti-vax and all these other things that they probably were called.
Right.
Right. Or what about bills that they couldn't pay that have accrued charges and interest?
Right. It affected their credit score as a result of it. We know that that's the case, right? Or maybe they were evicted because they couldn't even pay their bills anymore.
Why is this on the city of New York and not the hospitals that did it? Like, the city of New York is going to defend the hospitals, or the hospitals, like, how is that the city is responsible for back pay?
Well, what hospitals are involved?
It was the sanitation.
Well, they're the ones that fired the staff.
Oh, no, this is sanitation workers specifically that were represented. They worked for the city of New York. They pick up trash.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you meant all, like, them and all the medical staff that were fired.
No, this will have an applicable ruling to private employees as well. But this is specifically about government employees that were paid by taxpayers and worked for the government.
So the few thousand that were in those particular roles, but it's starting to spread. I mean, you're going to see much bigger, and you're right. We're going to start to see maybe this is now precedent for these other cases, specifically in that state. Here you can have the Supreme Court ruling on this. Like, can't go beyond the Supreme Court unless it goes all the way to Washington in this situation.
Well, it's the state Supreme Court. So Does this go even further? Who knows? But I do think we're going to continue to see cases like this. And again, I feel like it's such a mean thing to pile on trash collectors.
Yeah.
I don't understand why they want it. It's just to keep the power to do so.